morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Lisa Shirk. I'm a professor at the University of Notre Dame's Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. We welcome you here today for a panel looking at people-centered development and humanitarian approaches in Afghanistan, which is part of our ongoing program, which is called AFPAD, the Afghanistan Peace and Development Program. Too often, the international community has talked about Afghanistan without allowing for Afghans to lead their own way in a people-centered approach. Our program at Notre Dame is committed to amplifying and focusing on Afghan voices, Afghan solutions, and Afghan leadership for looking at the way forward in the short term with the humanitarian crisis, in the medium term in terms of development, and in the long term in the work for a political settlement. We're committed to the long term, and we hope you will continue to join us. With that, I will pass it to my colleague, Aref Dostiar, who is providing some leadership for this program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shirk. Good morning, everyone, distinguished panelists and guests, both here in person and also online. And I also want to give a special welcome to Mrs. Kufi, who is kindly joining us this morning, and we also hope to hear from her. The economic situation is grim in Afghanistan. We all know this. A recent UNDP report outlines billions of dollars lost over the past year, tightening spaces for women, the sharp rise in food inflation, and drastic decrease in purchasing power. And the Afghanistan risk analysis warns of the lack of capacity to respond to emergencies that might come out because of the winter weathers. But we have gathered here today to hear from a group of experts from Kabul. Dr. Nilab is joining us, and also here in Washington, about how this situation can change in the medium and long term, and how risks can be mitigated in the short term as well. So our focus is particularly, as Lisa mentioned, on the role of people, marginalized populations. Our goal is to learn what the local people are doing already and how the international community can partner with them. So we looked to our panelists to explain and also analyze the existing approaches to aid and development and tell us what needs to change to support the people of Afghanistan. We hope to have an interactive conversation with all of you in the room and also those who are joining online. So please participate with us. You're welcome to ask questions, but you're also welcome to, and I encourage this, to share your proposals and insights with us on how we can address this situation. I will share our broad questions, and in this order we will hear from the speakers. First, I will request Dr. Nilab Mubarez, who's joining us online, to describe the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of current efforts on the ground. Dr. Mubarez lives in Afghanistan. She's the former president of the Red Crescent Society, where she worked with the local people across the country. Her past and current activities have kept her in close contact with marginalized populations, and she will have important insight to share with us. Dr. Mubarez is a Fulbright alumnus and holds a master's degree in public administration from Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. Then I will invite Dr. Niloufar Sakhi to share with us her analysis of the, again, effectiveness or ineffectiveness is probably of the international interventions. And Dr. Sakhi has written extensively on Afghanistan, including a book on human security. She lectures on similar topics at George Washington University and also conducts research at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies. After that, we will go to Jeff Grieco, who serves as the president of the Afghan American Chamber of Commerce, to discuss the role of the private sector in development and provide us with a status report on the banking sector, as well as the Afghanistan Trust Fund. Last week, Jeff and his colleagues developed a 4-point recommendation paper, which I believe is distributed in the room, on how the Afghan Trust Fund could be best utilized for Afghanistan. So I urge you to read that. He brings a lot of experience from his leadership roles at the State Department and USAID and continued engagement with Afghans to the table today. And we also would like to hear from Mrs. Kufi, who's here with us today, on the more strategic look at the situation. So let us, without further ado, begin with yourself, Dr. Mubarak. If you could maybe in your remarks touch on what approaches are the local populations, particularly women, using to address humanitarian and development needs, what are their challenges, and what recommendations do you have on how the international community could partner with you and the local people there? Thank you, Dr. Mubarak.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. Dear panelists, dear organizers, I'm really delighted to bring you a few words from Kabul. I hope it will be helpful for further users. So coming to the topic that I am questioned on, which is about aid effectiveness and ineffectiveness, I'd like to, without going into details of the UNDP recent report, just give two, and also ILO, just give 2 or 3 points. The first one is that Afghanistan lost its GDP to go to 5 billions, which was 20 billions in 2012. We have lost 900,000 jobs. That means that we as an average family in Afghanistan is 7 multiple 6 is 9, sorry. 6.3 million people are confronted to food security already because of this loss of jobs. And also, as UN says, the number of people which were suffering from poverty and food insecurity has doubled to 20 million people. This is with all the aid that was spent last year, which raises to $2.5 billion over through UN system to Afghanistan. Thanks to all the people who helped us, countries, donor agencies, and I don't want to underscore the tremendous work of the UN that the aid, humanitarian aid, was not as efficient as it should have been. We are in a very disastrous situation, and according to the economic agencies present in Afghanistan, and I would give you the one of the examples, which is Harakat, we will lose $2.5 billion more, which is half of the GDP currently, next year if we don't change policies. So this is the very bleak situation, but it is still time to change it. When we look at the policies of the government as well, it was absolutely not helpful because the anti-woman policies that women are completely invisible. I'm not visible in my country through the medias because either I have to put my face and hide my face, or I can't even be invited to talk in my own country, while here I am able to talk with you. Work was banned. I was immediately dismissed without having even a letter. Just my special assistant called me that someone else came to replace you. This is the situation of women at work. About the school, you know that the school was already closed to girls over, at the secondary school. And that means that next year we will have no participant in the concours to go to the universities. So banning women from work and from school translates into $1 billion loss in the GDP of Afghanistan. Also, so the education was there, and about all the figures. Education, health, and economy means the loss of human security. We don't have human security in Afghanistan. The problem of legitimacy of the government, which is not solved, and we don't see any sign of the legitimacy for the de facto authority, is really making us frightened, because without full represented government, we will not see a better life, and it is dangerous and could even provoke new hostilities, while the only good result of today's this authority is that war has almost stopped all over Afghanistan. So this is very important. And also, I should highlight that no humanitarian organization can replace a legitimate government. So this is an emergency. And I'm very happy that, as Dr. Shirk said, you will focus on this in this panel on how to fix this deadlock, this problem. So while that I was working for at least 4.5 years last 4.5 years in the humanitarian sector, even before, but currently, recently, since few years, everybody is talking about humanitarian development nexus, but nexus was completely forgotten in the policies made earlier about how to support Afghanistan. With the ongoing conflict, especially in Ukraine, but also humanitarian disaster in Pakistan and climate change, and also the current instabilities in Iran and all over the world, and the economy of the world. For example, fuel prices, Afghanistan was hit because of the general situation in the world. So this situation cannot sustain. The world cannot give us to feed us. I think the world should give us some money to prevent further disastrous situation of famine and more loss of the GDP. With regards to women, I want to add more. Women have lost more jobs than men in Afghanistan in percentage, even in the agricultural sector, which was the main sector in Afghanistan that was recruited women, although without wages, but at least they were working and contributing to the table of the family. And education, in the governmental sector, education is the most important one. So this is one thing. The other thing is that mental health of women is not so much explained, and we are not talking enough, in my sense, about it. A very recent study, which will be or is already published in Lancet, says that even the percentage of suicide in women are rising in Afghanistan due to what has happened. Children, which are always connected to women, children we have seen more malnutrition cases, much more malnutrition cases in the children, and that is also very bad for the future of our kids, because that could affect them and long term as well. Women, they don't have any choice. There is no job, when there is a job, they are not paid correctly. It's the wages for women is extremely low, and often they don't have their husbands working, so they are also confronted to the nervousness at home, the domestic violence. And I've heard this personally from women who are telling me that they are working on the day, and when they go home, obviously they are working at home, but they are also under pressure of their husbands. The husbands are angry because they don't have jobs. So this is all going together. Also, I'm thinking about illicit work, that there is no data available about that, but what is the situation on that? We don't know at all. So I'm extremely worried for women of my country, which are victims of what, I mean, the sin that they have not done. We are all victims. And unfortunately, across the world, I mean, they are talking about women, freedom for women, etc. But the real problem, which is economy, which is the food, which is health, and having, health is not raised by diaspora neither. So this is a small request to our diaspora, which is very talented, and they are everywhere across the world, to pay attention more on us than on what they have lost. About diaspora,
I think those are really.
Yeah, one more point, and I will wrap up, is about the brain drain, which the GDP of due to the brain loss due to brain drain is not calculated. For the recommendations, I'll go very quickly. We have one solution, which is going toward development, I mean, preferred development and nexus, and leave the humanitarian action only for humanitarian, promote job creation policies, except for the winter, which we need to heat and feed the people. Otherwise, we have to go towards creating small entrepreneurship and one at least big macroeconomic project to be implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Those are all excellent points, Dr. Saab. You're painting a comprehensive picture, and it's also really grim. But we will come back to you and hear more about your recommendations. Before that, maybe Dr. Sabsakhi, if you could share a little about, you heard what the situation looks like, and can you explain what the international community is doing, what models are being used, and what should change?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lucian, and thank you everyone joining us today, those online and those in conference today. Well, I am looking at the situation differently than what's actually outlined, and it's based on my research that I conducted 2 years in Afghanistan. It was during Republic, of course, but I think the challenges are still the same, but of course, with an authoritarian system in place, that challenges have increased. So there are two systems of approaching development in Afghanistan. One is state-centric, another is people-centric. Afghanistan has been through state-centric approaches in the past. There were very few people-centric processes like NSP, followed by Citizen Charter Program. There were only few of them, and that were really people-centric. The rest were all state-centric. And by state-centric, I mean that the design of the program and implementation used to come from the top, in coordination of the ministries of the time, and that were channeled through inline ministries. And inline ministries were having those programs through either NGOs or contracted with other subcontractors to reach out to the communities. So that was the model before. And that model did not work very well because, as I highlighted in my own research, that did not boost up the people's ability and capacity to take lead of the development and humanitarian programs around them. And as I mentioned, to successful program of the times, the National Solidarity Program was comparatively better than the other programs because of the people-centric approach that the program had. And the program used to involve the communities, people, and bring people in the process and design of the program and implementation of the program, and also counting people to contribute 10% of the projects. And that contribution actually creates sense of ownership to the programs. And that sense of ownership leads to sustainability of the program. So that's how development program should lead if we want a sustainable development in any country. Especially now with an authoritative system in place, with the lack of a government actually, and with nothing in place, and we are not sure how the money is going to be spent in Afghanistan, with the system in place where there's no mechanism to hold them accountable. So especially in this particular time, the people-centric approach make a lot of sense, both for the people of the country, for the sustainability of the program, and for the result, any result that we are foreseeing it. Look, it's a very clear-cut model. I mean, what development means. Development means standing on people, creating environment, enabling condition for people. It's not for the state, it's for the people. Of course, and the state do protect the people, but when the states are holding accountable, if there's mechanism to hold the state accountable. In lack of such a state, all the resources should be invested on the people. And there are mechanisms, the models that I actually thought should work very well. I'm not going to talk about the challenges. Dr. Mubarak has already discussed lots of challenges, and all of us know what's happening in Afghanistan in terms of the humanitarian crisis, development crisis, reduction of funding, and all kinds of famine that we all are aware of. So I'm not going to talk about the issues. The way forward, I mean, in light of the people-centric approach, inclusivity is important. We hear a lot about inclusive politics, but we hear less about inclusive development. And inclusive development, you are bringing communities from the rural areas. Let's not forget, 75% of the population of Afghanistan live in the rural areas. And ignoring and undermining that population means not undermining the sustainable development. So involving them means bringing all the elders, communities, and district authorities, whoever are they, in this development process, not only symbolically, but meaningfully in the design of the program, what they need in their communities. That design should come from those particular communities in the rural areas. We did that in the past. I was dealing with development programs in the past, and people do want to participate, and people do want to highlight the needs that they have. I traveled around the country in very far remote areas, and there are capacities in those areas. They do know what they need, instead of us giving them what they need. That I think that's not a good model. So inclusion means a meaningful inclusivity in the design of the programs, whatever the UN or international NGOs or the governments of the country, if they are allowed to do that, that inclusivity is important. The civil society always works as a bridge, and it worked in the past. It could work now. In many of the remote areas, the NGOs are closing their offices. Women organizations in the South and East are tremendously, they're closing their offices, of course, security reasons, lack of money, and all the threats that are there. So the closure is coming up a lot. So that should be prevented. And this should be also part of that process, that inclusivity. Universities are the model that I have actually about the inclusivity. The heads of the departments or the instructors who are involved in the development of the programs, because there are departments within universities who teach sustainable development. So we did that in the past. We brought faculty members to those mechanisms, and it helped because they are giving you some principles and concepts that could rely on. Those could be part of the process. And of course, whoever is there, by inclusivity, I don't mind, excluding the current government. They should be in the, not government, sorry, regime. They should be part of the process, but the lead shouldn't be, of course, given to them. The lead should be given to the people who are representing different districts, different village, different province. That mechanism work in some places. And as I mentioned, that was done before. Partly it was successful, but then because of the, of course, government change, political upheavals, that did not continue. That is one thing, the inclusive development that could be part of it. the model, the cut and paste model of development did not work in Afghanistan. For example, I have heard a lot in the coordination meeting in Kabul that let's bring the Bosnian development program here, or let's launch, I don't know, a Somalia development program and here. And they used to bring some models from there. I think that is not going to help. So the design, as I mentioned, design should come out of those particular mechanism, coordination mechanism initially, because it's the early stages, and that design should be implemented again through people by including them and asking them to contribute a percentage in cash or kind. Of course, people are poor at this stage; they cannot contribute in cash, but kind, the land, any other thing in the village or district that they can contribute. That 10% of the total cost will create sense of ownership, and that will people will feel responsible for what the programs are. Also, another fact that I have seen in my research, that each province in Afghanistan has its own needs. It's not only about development, it's about even political processes and peace process. I did another research on peace process. Peace for Badakhshan was something else, and peace for Kandahar and Herat was a different thing. So peace meant different thing. The same development means different thing for different parts of the country. Therefore, keeping in consideration the socioeconomic conditions of each province and village and district, that inclusive mechanism is important. That will address also those challenges, to address and to bring program or development programs in area, whatever the community really needed. Then another challenge from past years, from past decades, and also now, lack of coordination among donor organizations and communities. That is a lot. There has been repetition of the programs throughout 20 years, and even I'm afraid right now that the same thing is happening, to be honest. The same training, the same packages, repetition of the same people, repetition of the same training. That is the waste of money. It's not efficient way of spending money. That is why, again, going back to that mechanism for coordination among the donor communities, including UN, is extremely important at this particular time, to contribute resources rather than to repeat the efforts that was there. And again, the one very last model, which is also highlighted in my book, and I'll stop there, Arif Jan, I promise you, is the discourse, the creation of discourse. That should come alongside all the other program. One of the elements that I have found in my research is sometimes the traditional norms and culture impede people to design a different development programs because of certain restrictions that are embedded in the culture, especially for women. I mean, those cultural restrictions impede women to step into development program. I detailed that in my writing, in the research, that how, because I interviewed a wide range of women and men about those restrictions which are embedded in the cultural component of the society. So how to address that is to create discourse. According to many models around the world, we have seen creating discourse about a situation among the people, even through religious mechanism that people rely on, that is going to address or create new norms, new values, reform the norms and values, and people feel confident to step in. And that is, of course, a long-term process of development, but that should go side by side of development project. I stop there and then get back during the question session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabsehi. You touched on so many interesting ideas, and we'll definitely get back to you with some questions. Ms. Koufi, you have a few minutes, or okay?
After you.
Okay. So, okay. Jeff, we will hear from you.
Okay.
And now, if you could talk a little about the role of the private sector and the ATF. But we will come back. We will have a discussion in the next hour. And so we'll hear your initial remarks, and then we'll go to Mrs. Koufi. Thank you.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. I thought I'd start first to give our audience a little bit of context. Afghanistan is now in the most complex emergency of any nation in the world, in my view. It involves both a humanitarian and a food security crisis, a public health crisis, a governance crisis, a monetary, fiscal, and capital liquidity and banking crisis, as well as an IDP and refugee crisis. All of it happening simultaneously to the Afghan people and forcing over 90% of the population into acute malnutrition and dramatically reduced purchasing power. The United States government has subjected itself to a precarious and difficult response to the emergency after withdrawing US and NATO forces and now basically refusing to deal with the Taliban interim administration politically or economically. We've thrown billions of dollars to the UN and directed them to go fix the situation. But don't let any Taliban sanctioned person, individual, or network organization touch the UN assistance. The scale of the crisis is well beyond the UN's capacities, but they've worked tirelessly to feed and help clothe and keep people in shelter and have maintaining sanitation systems in order to prevent an outright famine this year, which we believe, and I think largely the UN believes now, that they've prevented. But we have a bad winter coming now, another year of reduced electricity, reduced purchasing power to buy food, and heating is not available, and agricultural production is at an all-time low. Now, the international financial institutions have been reluctantly participating in slow, incremental attempts to stabilize the economy, but it's been ineffective, and it's lacking any real concerted strategy at this point. They call it Afghanistan 3.0. That's what they call it inside the bank meetings this week on Afghanistan. But what the IFIs, the international financial institutions, really need is a much more aggressive and implementable stabilization programming that would start immediately. And they need to resolve the billions of dollars in program assistance that was due to Afghan NGOs and implementing partners and companies that did work for the donor community in Afghanistan, but were never paid when the government suddenly fell. Now, we have authored in our memorandum that has been disseminated for today's event, a 4-point action plan to focus on one aspect, and that is the banking, the financial, and the monetary crisis, because we believe that underpins almost everything that we do in response. Action 1, we're calling on the US government and the United Nations to use all their diplomatic powers and partnerships with other donor states to begin the process of returning all the frozen assets of the Afghan commercial banks' beneficiary deposit account holders, which in aggregate amounts to about $1 billion in the United States and Europe and a few other countries. That money is now frozen. That is not the foreign exchange reserves of the central bank of the previous government. It is the actual deposits of everyday Afghans who we as donors convinced to put their money into the bank and not to keep it in their mattress at the house because it was fully insured. It's time to return that money in small incremental steps. We're recommending about a $50 million per month transfer back to the account holders. If they've moved to the United States, to Doha, or are in an overseas refugee situation, they should be able to access their funding there as well. Action number 2, the donors and the IFIs and the United Nations Assistance Afghanistan Office, UNAMA, must continue negotiating over some type of short-term banking facility for Afghanistan that'll provide emergency financing and a vehicle for, it's similar to the Humanitarian Exchange Fund, which the World Bank proposed, but with which both the Afghan banking community and the central bank refused because they believe it creates a duplicative shadow central bank for the country. And as they've watched the UN economy in Afghanistan basically overtake the private economy of Afghanistan, they're very fearful for good reason. We're recommending that they establish an Afghan Interim Finance Facility, AIFF, as a short-term solution. It shouldn't be focused on the humanitarian cash transfers for the UN only. It should also help provide trade financing and to actually be able to get Afghan exports and imports moving again. It's a trading country with no access to ports. Trade is the way they survive. We have to figure out a solution. Now, action item 3, the US government must aggressively leverage the new Afghanistan Trust Fund, or ATF, to create a regional corresponding bank mechanism which formalizes the relationship with state-owned trade finance banks within the adjacent markets of the UAE, Turkey, Pakistan, India, Uzbekistan, and maybe even, the words are coming out of my mouth, maybe even China. Specific recommendations for leveraging the new trust fund would include a series of new programming. It would include loans or letters of credit guarantees or counter guarantees for exports and import transactions. It would create funding for ADB, IMF, UN, World Bank, maybe even the DFC, which has been vacant in Afghanistan for some time now, to provide insurance programming, both political, commercial risk, but also transactional insurance, and maybe some other infrastructural investment facilitation. Lastly, we'd like this new facility to provide credit enhancement facilities to access special credit instruments so the Afghan commercial banks can shore up their capital deficits. We believe that at least half of the Afghan banks will close in the next 6 months if this liquidity crisis is not addressed immediately. There are only 14 Afghan banks. Some consolidation of the sector is much needed. However, not closing 50% of the accounts in the banks. Last action item we're recommending is that the donors need to begin launching a series of market-led, private sector implemented stabilization programs that will increase livelihoods for the poor, for the disadvantaged Afghans, through larger private sector employers, institutions, and NGOs. It could include small-scale mining projects, capacity development to do the right kind of mining, not the bad mining that's occurring right now. It could include some small hydro and small energy projects like wind and solar, and other light infrastructure projects like roads and other things that will lead to increased trade. We especially want that assistance to target women entrepreneurs who are vital to the market economy of Afghanistan. Though I want to close on a good note. Was able to attend the Istanbul Donor Conference on Afghanistan, and I believe this last recommendation is actually being addressed now, both by the United States through USAID's existing and new programming that they're putting in place, and by the World Bank, which is implementing, as you know, $700 million of the ARTF money was moved about 2 months ago to do 4 major programs. And it's my understanding that they're going to ramp up and do a lot more programming on the ground direct with the Afghan people. But none of the money will be able to touch the Taliban. If the Taliban threaten or get into the networks of these providers, the donors will be forced to sanction the organization and shut it down. And nobody wants that to happen at this critical juncture. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Those are interesting points, and I do have some questions that I will get back to you. We had a similar event last year around this time in this very room. It was right after the collapse, and we asked some of the same questions that we are asking today. Ms. Koufi, everything you heard today, can you please explain if the conditions are there for these ideas to be implemented? And what can we do so that we don't ask these same questions next year around this time?
Oh, there we go.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving the Afghans the chance to share their experience and concerns, but also moving forward their recommendation. As Lisa said, we have been listened to a lot. We are included, but I think the important thing now is that to give the leadership to the Afghans and to the people of Afghanistan. I have been here in the United States for 20 days now. I'm leaving tomorrow, more than 20 days actually. I'm leaving tomorrow. In my conversation with people from all walks of life in Washington and New York, including Security Council members of Congress, State Department, think tanks, etc. The two commonly asked questions are like, as you said, and as everybody here spoke, and I'm very proud of both of you, and Dr. Mobaris also, for touching upon some of the on-the-ground realities, but also your recommendations. I'm often asked 2 questions. How can we influence Taliban, and how can the humanitarian aid goes to Afghanistan without empowering Taliban?
which I think the second one is something unavoidable. The humanitarian aid supported, the insurgents in Palestine, in Syria, and in any country. It does empower the de facto power. And in the case of Afghanistan also, I think last year around the same time, as you said, Taliban were struggling for survival. Now I think they have gone past those survival time. They are establishing themselves, and in terms of including influencing the humanitarian aid by not only controlling it, but also establishing several NGOs and non-governmental organizations. As far as I know, they have registered 1,100 non-governmental organizations to be able to introduce for funding to the humanitarian aid. They claim that they have increased the domestic revenue, and the World Bank report also says that. Of course, the World Bank researchers did not really manage to access the evidence, but rather people that we also contacted different ministries. I don't want to mention the ministries, not to put them at risk, but these are the people with whom we also talk on a daily basis. Let's assume, I don't believe that that is true, but for 1 minute, let's assume that that is true. Now, the question is, where are these money going? If they have increased the domestic revenue, where are they paying it, right? So the Taliban have kind of divided the labor. They want the international community to feed the people of Afghanistan without any accountability towards the people. And they want the money to be spent on empowering their soldiers. The only thing probably when you travel across Afghanistan, you would see the major development projects is the military bases of Taliban. And this I have seen firsthand myself 2 months ago when I was close to Afghanistan, that I could see with my eyes. They're building military base. Now, why are they investing on those military? Is of course, because they are preparing for a battle. Now, a battle against who? And how is this impacting the global security? This is a serious question, but nobody wants to hear about it because, I think the train has left Washington in a way that Afghanistan is no longer part of the foreign policy in terms of the strategic, look beyond just humanitarian and human rights crisis. From my perspective, are great, wonderful. We need to continue to support people. Country, poor people. Unfortunately, Afghanistan has millions of dollars, billions underground. Now we know that there are different interests going to Afghanistan for economic motivations, different regional powers, different regional countries trying to execute contracts on untransparent manners, having eyes on our natural resources, which is not really benefiting the people, I would say. But I think it's time for all of us to see beyond humanitarian aid and human rights crisis. What is the overall political strategy to avoid not only the further collapse and deterioration of the economy of Afghanistan and the suffering of people, but also to protect your own, when I say your own, I mean the international audience, your own global security. What is the United States policy beyond giving aid and paying money through different channels, including, sending $40 million on a weekly basis to central bank, which goes to a private bank, I guess. What is the strategy? I think nobody wants to hear about this because in my conversation with a lot of, politicians, I heard that, Afghanistan is a failed democracy project for them. Probably for United States, it is a failed project, but not for the people of Afghanistan. Democracy has not failed for the people of Afghanistan because there is no alternative to democracy. So how are we ready to support the people of Afghanistan in their desire for an accountable government based on their will? This is something we have tried to do in our negotiation with Taliban in Doha. Of course, it was very late when we started the negotiation because already the United States signed an agreement which empowered Taliban. And we know that in that agreement, there was no word of women and human rights. In fact, when we were challenging the US diplomats for not emphasizing the word of women and human rights, they were like, our soldiers are not there to protect women of Afghanistan. It was not even about women of Afghanistan. I think it's about your security And that is something that should keep you engaged on a strategic level about looking beyond humanitarian aid. Because only 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Imran Zawahiri was killed. Like 5 minutes, Dr. said you were working at the security palace. Is it 5 minutes walking? 2 minutes probably by car distance from the palace. So now there are like 4 elements in the Doha Agreement on the basis of which Taliban were empowered to be who they are. We created a narrative that the Taliban have changed, that they are Taliban 2.0, and we're now trapped into our narrative 4 elements: political dialogue, which will lead to a political settlement, meaningful disassociation with all military extremist groups, and explicitly mentioning of Al-Qaeda, right? Ceasefire, release of the prisoners. Now, I know that none of this actually is kept as promised by Taliban. I don't know what is the need of having the Doha Agreement on the basis of which Taliban get their legitimacy. I think it's time moving forward for the world to use all their leverage before they lose them. I know that the Taliban reliance on new regional geopolitics is increasing. They already have a alternative for their relationship with US and West, which is China and Russia. We know that. They probably over time, they will have very little to care about the Western relationship. So I think a regional approach to make Taliban accountable, to bring constitutional order, because everything else is just, pouring money into a situation where it's like pouring drops into an ocean, which is not going to help. Also, on a personal level, I feel humiliated. I feel heartbroken when I hear all the stories about suffering of my people while we could avoid this. There is also a chance to avoid this, and that is a political settlement. And when I mention and lobby for a political settlement, it doesn't show our weakness. Please don't regard it as a weakness. We are ready to stand and advocate for our people for ages. Taliban were out of the country for 25 years. They were never regarded as diaspora. Now we are out of the country for 8 months and we are like diaspora and detached from our society. No, I never will stop advocating, like all of you, for the people of Afghanistan. Don't regard our request for political settlement as our weakness. What we are offering is a political settlement is not only in the interest of Afghanistan and the region, but also in your own interest, in your own security interest. So there are leverages that you can use those leverages, and look beyond humanitarian crisis and human rights crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kofi, for those important points. I'm hearing that if we don't reframe the question, we have to refocus it. And the political settlement is something I personally agree completely. And we have started serious conversations here. And so we're with you on that. And hopefully we'll continue, and all the recommendations that you shared. So thank you so much for being here with us today, and also sharing those important insights. And this is the type of things we would like to hear from everybody. So please feel free to join. And as you prepare your points to share with us, if you are online, please feel free to write your questions in the Q&A section, and we will take them. Or again, your comments and proposals. And if you are in the room and would like to share, you can just raise your hand and we'll get you a mic. But before or as you prepare, I would like to go to Dr. Saeb Mobarez and hear some of her reactions to what she heard. And also, Dr. Saeb Mobarez, if you could share, you told us about creating jobs, for example. How do you see the conditions there? Can we really take practical steps? How do you suggest that we could implement that type of an approach there? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. John. About what Dr. Sakhi said, I fully agree with her that networks, community networks like CDC or Citizen Charter people, these are networks that work and did work before, and they could be really networks that empowers the people without going through the de facto authority, and they cannot then stop thousands of people because then the people of the communities will be against them. So this is very important, and I'm delighted about that. About Jeff, yes, Jeff, I am a signatory of through United Against Inhumanity for the release of the funds. Absolutely, what you said is extremely important, and this is one of the reasons why we went to such a drastic situation that we are living today in Afghanistan. So this nexus of humanitarian, which was explained by Dr. Sakhi, and development, which was also touched upon by Jeff. These are what I'm trying to say as well, and absolutely not through the government, not through the through an authority which is not yet recognized by ourselves inside the country, and that no efforts to do so, but through the people. About Madame Koufi and what she said, absolutely. I think that, as I said earlier, we have to have a political settlement, a government which is broad-based, a government which is representing everybody. We are a very diverse society. Women are excluded, many ethnies are excluded, and those people who are not thinking the same way as the Taliban authority are also excluded. That was the case before. During the Republic, the Taliban were not there, and this is the biggest mistake that we have done during the Bonn Agreement. They had to be in the negotiations, and we wouldn't maybe see what happened after. Now we are in a different situation. Exclusion, at that time there was one group which was excluded, and now if they do the same thing, they will exclude multiple groups. Now we shouldn't forget about our own faults. Why the Taliban took over? It is not just because Americans wanted to leave Afghanistan. It is because the power, be it at the parliament or outside the parliament, did not play its role to protect the government, the Republic, nor did any efforts that could stop corruption. I've heard before the shoot of the government that the Taliban are speeding up in their progress, even in the north, because of the islands of power who are excluding other people in the same community from power. So examples are much large, but I don't want to go into the details. We need to absolutely do the political settlement. The Secretary of State Blinken, when he came to Kabul on 15th of April, I was at the meeting. He promised political settlement, but unfortunately it did not happen because what happened in 15th of August prevented. Now we have to resum the Doha talks for the third, especially for the third point, which is anti-Afghan talks. But again, anti-Afghan talks does not mean that nobody from outside the Taliban group would be added into these talks from inside Afghanistan. Everybody who were Democrat did not leave the country. We are here, we are still defending a democratic Afghanistan. We are taking all the dangers, but defending democratic Afghanistan from Kabul, from Herat, from Laghman, from Kandahar, from Khost, from Herat, from Badakhshan, from everywhere. So please do not ignore us. We are a silent majority. We are not, we the people of Afghanistan, we are not part of the Taliban, not part of the opposition to the Taliban, military opposition, or like, I hope it is not becoming military. So, for that point, I want to say that no to war and no to exclusion. Coming back very quickly on the real question, which is how to fix the problem of jobs. I think that we should fix from the point which has been failed. For example, 900,000 people who are existing, we can have their lists very quickly. They are skilled people. They are not people who cannot do something. These people should be targeted to very quickly get new jobs. And these are the people and not the government again, or I'm sorry, the authority. I'm also calling authority. These people should be targeted and in a group, in a mechanism that could help them create new businesses in order to make them small enterprises or medium-sized enterprises, which could be then preventing. This will feed 6.3 million people. We have absorbed already 6.3 million people. The second part that we can work on is to work with the Chamber of Commerce and a public sector, which is working hard, and I see them here in Kabul, how they are putting their own, interests aside to stay with Afghans. Jeff knows about them. He's in contact with them, I think, regularly, and they're trying to maintain the trade, and they did it for about $7 billion last year, although the banking transaction sanctions was huge problem for them, but they maintained that, and without that, we would have nothing to eat. We would be dying. This is the situation. This is the reality. So with their support and supporting them to get more capacities, middle-sized companies could grow. I have seen dozens of projects that are ready, but nobody is there to fund them. And these are projects of the people. Then the last but not the least is we need to focus on projects that give food security for Afghanistan first. That means agriculture and irrigation. Irrigation and agriculture are going together. In Afghanistan, we have huge possibilities and already studied projects like Kokcha Dam, like Kunar Dam, like canals of Salma and Kamal Khan canal, which needs to be finished. And as Jeff said, thousands, if not hundreds, if not thousands of projects were started, approved, but not paid. Those must resum, and that will create jobs again. So at least one big dam, which will worth $1 billion, instead of $1 billion to give food and then finished, and we don't have food for next year, and another $1 billion for the small enterprises, and $500,000 or further for humanitarian action is my recommendation. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Saib. Those are excellent points. And I'm so pleased that you highlighted that not everybody have left, that there are lots of people in the country, and even the people who have left want to return. They're just waiting, as we have been discussing, and some people were already outside and they're locked out right now, or that's how they feel. So thank you. I will ask a question from Dr. Sabsahi. Yeah, you talked about the people-centric approach. Can you like maybe share, yeah, and you also shared a few mechanisms from the past. What practically could we do to implement that now? Also, one of the people in the Zoom, they ask, are there examples from Afghanistan right now of initiatives led and owned by people that we could use as examples of inspiration and build upon them?
Thank you. Thank you, Arif John. Before coming to your question, there's something that I got from the earlier discussion is the distinction between the humanitarian assistance and development assistance. They are actually different things. They have to go side by side, of course, but currently it seems the world is focusing on addressing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. So there's less focus on the development assistance. Development is a long-term process, as all of us know. It is not really related to the time. It should go side by side, as Ms. Kufi mentioned, side by side with the political development. Socioeconomic and political developments are interlinked. So therefore, there is a prerequisite actually for the economic development, which is the political development. And I'm glad that we at the CROC already started talking about the political processes, which is a process, a long-term process, of course, but it has different components that is attached to it, and it needs certain specialization working with the communities also to enable environment for a political process. Otherwise, it will be again a top-bottom approach. So I'm glad that here the CROC Institute is trying to explore the options and working and brainstorming about different ways to approach that. And I think today's panel that we are talking about development could lead us towards the political development as aside, because they are all interlinked. You are creating enabling environment for that political discourse to happen among the people. From it, the issues should emerge from the people, and a solution should come from the people in order to go to the top and be a bottom-top approach to peacemaking or peace building that we are working on. So this is actually we are actually doing what today is a step toward that long-term processes that I hope CROC will continue working on this. In relation to your question. Unfortunately, there is not a very proper mechanism at this particular time. But I have heard, I have been in contact with many NGOs on the ground, the women NGOs, civil society broadly working on human rights and on a peace process and peacemaking peace building that they used to do in the past, and community development. So based on my interaction with many, they had to change their strategy to address humanitarian crisis. And Taliban actually came to many organizations and they asked them to change their strategies, particularly in terms of women's rights organizations. So now there is no any proper coordinated, systematic mechanism to address humanitarian and development crisis, but NGOs are taking lead to distribute the packages that they receive from the UN and address and have more accessibility to the remote areas. And that is actually taking lead by many of the NGOs at this particular time. It needs to be a coordinated mechanism because even with the humanitarian crisis, there are issues regarding lack of accessibility to resources from the remote areas. And because the distribution of food even was a targeted distribution, not flat distribution. And I had a meeting with the UN agency at some point. I recommended that if you just go for the flat distribution rather than targeted distribution, because then you target the community and then the other communities or people will be deprived of that particular packages that you're distributing. But then UN justification was, well, still security issues, bureaucracy, and many other elements that they, of course, have reasons to go for that passage. So the short answer is no. There is no coordinated systematic mechanism. There is oriented, disorganized processes of addressing only humanitarian crisis through food distribution and addressing health crisis, like small mobile clinics in some parts are opening, and health packages like hygiene packages are being distributed among the communities. But overall, no, unfortunately, there hasn't been a systematic approach. That's why, the proposal that I have been pushing from last 1 year almost is there is more coordination. There's need for more coordination and establishing those community centers that used to be before. That could be a part of and that could contribute to organizing the processes. And now, of course, addressing humanitarian crisis, but that could add to the humanitarian assistance also when the time starts for that particular process, which I think at this point, it hasn't been started yet.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. I think that's what Lisa basically termed as like handouts is what is going on and how we can move past that. We have time for 2 interventions. And so
I have a few things I'd like to address if I could.
So yeah, absolutely. Let's hear from John, if you don't mind, and then we will end with your remarks, Jeff. Thank you. John.
Just one thing, there's a app out there called ASEL, an organization, ASEL.
ASEL. Yeah.
The work that they're doing is phenomenal, and that could potentially be something to build upon.
What they're doing is some phenomenal work, and that could be something that could potentially be built upon in terms of similar to your National Solidarity Program and tapping into an organization like that. It's an innovative young group of Afghans trying to do the right thing, and I think you can build upon that pretty well and try to get some systematic piece into that. I will go back to say that your National Solidarity Program was an excellent program, but that program was defeated not by anybody else but the government itself, because the government chose to shut it down because corruption in the government it was not seen as it was going counter to the corrupt government of Karzai. And Karzai shut it down by standing up the independent director of local governance that took over that program, and that became a PAC for Karzai elections. So again, if you as Afghans want to be heard, you're going to have to talk about first and foremost inclusivity, absolutely, at all levels, political development, but you're going to have to deal with how do we, the international community, work with you to ensure that the pervasive corruption does not come back into the government. That is absolutely critical, and the international community is going to be very concerned about that in donors, and we have to have a way to provide you the space to have your conversations about what right looks like, but we also have to be able to walk away knowing that the corruption will not come back on into the government, because the corruption beat this government, not the Taliban. Absolutely is what defeated this government. And that to me is something we have to prevent. You'll get another shot, but you got one more shot. And it's how do we defeat that corruption?
Thank you so much, John. That's a very important point. Jeff, to you, and then we will wrap it up.
So I appreciated Fazia's comments. I take them to heart. She's a real hero of the Afghan people and especially Afghan women. So I want to address leverage. I keep hearing repeatedly from our business leaders that basically there are 3 people preventing young girls from going back to school in Afghanistan, and all 3 are in Kandahar. And none of them are the reformers that the previous U.S. government negotiated with, and the current government abandoned what I would call loosely reformers in the Taliban. So let's go through what real leverage we have as the United States and as donors. Is there a U.S. NATO military or counterterrorism leverage? Not really. As the drone strike showed, we don't need on-the-ground intelligence in order to act and to know what's happening on the ground. There may still be human elements within that, but the administration, and I think every, whether it's Republican or Democrat, would agree, they have already moved structurally to handle counterterrorism from outside Afghanistan if they have to deal with it in Afghanistan. So that leverage is not there. Regional players. I think these regional players have proven to be pretty bad actors when it comes to Afghanistan, including Pakistan, who I believe had a serious role in the overthrow of the elected government of the people of Afghanistan. Iran, which is having its own populist movement problems right now as a result of the way it acts in its country, let alone in Afghanistan, where they have dumped sanctioned product, steel, and other products and are buying illegally mined products to bring back to Iran. China and Russia are in there right now, both for nefarious reasons, in order to secure critical minerals and to bring them out into Pakistan through their agency. There is no regional player leverage, in my view, realistically. How about the United States Congress? We told President Ghani, probably starting 4 years ago, that he lost the American public. And we based that on the American Congress. The House and the Senate was fed up with the corruption that John talked about. They were fed up with the lack of improved governance and the problems that they were having. And as a result, we have no ability to go to the American people and get a big groundswell of support to go back into Afghanistan to counter what's happening on the ground. I don't think the US Congress can be a partner for the Afghan people right now. How about Taliban reformers? Do we have leverage with Taliban reformers? Well, I think we negotiated with them and we got an agreement with them, and they haven't honored any of it to date. So why would we try to look at further negotiation with the people who can't deliver on what they promised to deliver on? So I think what this comes down to is what you're beginning to see in Iran and in other countries, frankly, in Africa too, is that peaceful grassroots movements are the only way to deal with autocratic regimes, especially a regime like the Talibs who base it on a radical form of Islam. Second point I want to make, the shift is already occurring. We're shifting from humanitarian assistance into development assistance, but I know this is very nuanced for people that don't know development very well. What we're not talking about is 5-year big programs like we had done previously under the elected government. We're talking about short 1 to 3 year maximum short interjections. I call them stabilization programs because they're very clearly defined in the Global Fragility Act, which has been passed and signed by presidents. So we're implementing for the next year or two, at least until we see how the recovery of the economy is, we're implementing stabilization development programs in Afghanistan. Lastly, on the Solidarity and Citizen Charter, I can tell you when I was in government, it was corrupt from not just the Karzai administration, but in the Ghani administration, Citizen Charter had problems. There was political use of the grassroots funding to go to only certain allies of the elected government and not to make a truly community-based development approach that elders and women could participate in freely. We missed that. We pressured them. They knew it. The United States government was fed up with it and extremely mad about it and cut back almost all the funding, but it didn't matter. So we want to push solutions that the SEAL solution is a good one because it's 100% transparent. It's compliant with all corruption under the transparency, global transparency activities programming that are done by Transparency International. It's a way for us to get assistance to communities directly without it being parsed to one community or another. So I do like a SEAL. I think we have some more infrastructural things to deal with them to make it a good thing. And OFAC, the Office of Foreign Asset Control and Treasury, likes the SEAL program, but haven't given it a special license as yet. They are still operating under the general license number 20. And I'll stop there.
And just one point, the community centers and the entire mechanism of distribution of aid and resources to people, when government is involved, of course there is corruption. And that's how we have seen in the NSP and charter program, because government was so much involved in everything of it. And that's why there was a high level of corruption. So the model that actually I have been pushing is to take the government out of that.
Yeah.
Take the government out of the entire process and make it totally community-based center. And then you will address the issue of corruption, which used to exist in NSP and Citizen Charter. And that was high, by the way. And there were lots of other challenges in NSP in addition to the corruption that anyone who is interested, I can refer to my book. that I have highlighted all the other challenges within the program. And those challenges were mainly because the government was involved. The government was fully leading it, distributing the money, and designing even sometimes. So that model could be utilized because of it is community perspectives, that the community was involved, that was inclusive of elders. I interviewed women, and women were having 10% of the electoral committee there. And yeah, some of them had problem that their role was symbolic, but some were really having some role, and it mobilized the women from the community to take part, make decisions. And I sat with many of those implementers of those programs, and especially the members of the electoral committees who were leading and designing the program. So it has so much positive points in terms of including the people of the community. But again, yes, I completely agree with John and Jeff about the corruption component, and the corruption goes back to the element that government was fully in charge. And from the top.
How do we include the Taliban? Because more than 50% of the Afghan public identifies themselves as Talibs. Let's just say that. That's in the Asia Foundation annual surveys. So how do we include them at the community level without ceding the influence of the community-based program to them so that's used for political purposes? Is that feasible to do that at the community level?
Well, that is of course feasible. I agree that even when Citizen Charter and NSP was there, people were complaining to me when I was interviewing them that they were not using the name Talib at that time. They were using the term strongman.
Okay.
That strongmen are trying to sabotage our work. They're trying to create problems. They're asking us for commissions, for programs.
Okay.
But then there were also well-wishers.
Yeah.
That they were trying to, there was a struggle within the committees of the NSP and Citizen Charter that there's a strong man, whether ex-warlords or I don't know, the Talibs.
Yeah.
There was a push and pull among them to that who will lead, who will design, who will implement the programs. Sometimes they had to give up, to be honest. Some NSP community centers, they stopped their activities completely. They just shut down because it was not possible to work under that mafia, right? I put that name, and that happened. But some succeeded. Some actually succeeded. So there was not really black and white in terms of the CDCs, community development centers and all, but the challenges could now, based on the failure of some of the aspects of NSP and Citizen Charter, those could be addressed now. And by the way, I just talked to one of the folks who were in Afghanistan and dealing with the CDC. He said that Taliban are trying to revive that CDC model.
Oh, okay.
And that's in some provinces, which is not, I don't know, I have no idea now how that could be interpreted. And they are bringing their own people into that. Why? Because they want to attract funding. So that has to be addressed. I did not cover that element. This research is based on a couple of years back, and then my interaction with folks who used to work on that. But that has to be challenged if this model of community development centers are utilized for development. I think that could be one of the options to further explore.
Well, that's really good. I think that brings us to a very good note to end. I have noted maybe 4 points quickly. First, we learned that the situation is grim. But second, ideas exist. And so today we heard lots of interesting and substantial ideas and recommendations, both from Dr. Saeb Nilab and our panelists here. And 3 is that opportunities also exist because, as Dr. Saeb mentioned, our people are still there, and those who are outside are also willing to partner. And so we need to work with our international colleagues on this. The challenge that could be for further discussion is how to implement these ideas. For instance, on the revival of the CDCs, how do we prevent infiltration from the types of people that could spoil the initiatives? I wish we had more time to learn about the market-led stabilization idea. I think that's fascinating. And also Dr. Saeb mentioned about it as well. And the political settlement, the political process idea. All of these for further discussion. I would like to thank Dr. Shirk for her support and idea for this event, together with Dr. Sakhi and Jeff and Dr. Nilab Mubarak. Thank you so much for your insights and your time to be here with us today. Maura, I would like to thank you for your support and hosting us here, and Carla as well. Josh, thank you. And I also want to recognize Jenna from the Kroc Institute, who supported us on campus. And I also want to thank Ray Offenheiser, who has been a source of inspiration. He's the director of the Pulte Institute for Global Development. He couldn't be here with us today, but we have consulted with him, and he joined us online today. So thank you all for joining, for participating. Until next time.